Welcome, everyone. My name is Lou Nani, and it's another beautiful day on campus. It's sunny in the mid 70s. It's been this way all week, and we staged the move-ins for our first-year students. Half of the group moved in on Monday, Tuesday. The second half moved in on Wednesday, Thursday. So too did the transfer students. They're all in their rooms right now. The upperclassmen and women are actually moving on campus today and through the weekend. And then just in 3 days, on Monday, we'll begin our first day of classes here for the fall semester, which you know is going to go straight through and will end just before Thanksgiving. It's quite a whirlwind and an amazing experience here in higher education, given the backdrop of COVID-19 and all the other challenges. But I think our team has worked really hard to do everything they can to control what is possible at this point. 12% of the classes are going to actually be offered this semester online due to faculty health concerns or concerns with family-related members at home. That means 88% of the classes will be taught in person, but we'll also have an option if a student is to get sick or need to be quarantined to be able to continue with those classes virtually. The band was heard practicing on campus yesterday. It's always a sign of great things to come, including our fall sports seasons and football that's just around the corner. So we are particularly thrilled and grateful today to be joined by Jack Swarbrick, class of '76, Notre Dame, Stanford Law. He is the vice president of the university, and he is the James E. Rohr Director of Athletics, and he is beginning his 12th year in this capacity. So Jack, welcome. It's good to be with you. And I know, given hundreds of questions that have come in, we're going to try to group them together and get to as many of them as possible. So thank you. You are one of the very best I know in the business, Jack, at anticipating trends and staying ahead of the game. And we've had so many changes for you to deal with. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 a few weeks ago announced that they were only going to play conference games. And so 3 of our games that were scheduled for football this year were discontinued. The ACC just yesterday rolled out its new schedule, and we 10+1 added our game, and that was just announced less than 24 hours ago. The football team has been basically quarantined in the Morris Inn all summer and has been tested regularly with great success and begun preparations for the season. And we're going to get to compete for an ACC championship this year while still maintaining our long-term independence. Your head must be spinning. Did you see any of this coming, and how have you and your team adapted to these changes?
Well, first, Lou, thanks for having me on. I love this opportunity. I know a lot of this is of interest to a lot of people at Notre Dame, and it evolves daily. So I love the opportunity to come on and chat with everybody who's interested in Notre Dame athletics and our student athletes and who's so great at supporting them. So thanks for the opportunity. It'd be foolish to say I saw it coming. You know, none of us have been able to predict the course of the pandemic. I'm fond of saying that one outcome of this is an outcome my children are very comfortable with, is that I now know I don't know anything. It changes. What I say at 9 o'clock is probably wrong by noon, and what I say at noon is probably wrong by 3. And it's the life we're all living. You try and stay as connected with others in your industry as you can. Talk a lot with other athletic directors, commissioners, a lot with the media, because they're sort of a fulcrum of a lot of information. And so at best, you try and get a little advance warning of what's coming next. I did believe fairly early on that the consequences would be long lasting. I told my staff, this is a 2-year dynamic. It's not a 3-month dynamic. Back in March, we had that view. So we at least shaped our expectations by that. Everything that's followed after it has been impossible to predict, but in the context of the data that you get on a daily or weekly basis, as you got closer to it, you could see those trends coming.
Well, Coach Brian Kelly was quoted saying recently that when three games against Stanford and USC and Wisconsin were discontinued, that the phone was ringing off the hook with teams wanting to play Notre Dame. Did you entertain those discussions, or did you know all along that you would revert to the ACC conference, which has been so good to us and supplying us with games, and just trying to put together the schedule had to be a last minute Herculean challenge?
Yeah. First of all, I feel compelled to note that our partners, Stanford, USC, Wisconsin, were great about letting us know what was coming, right? We weren't surprised. They would call and say, hey, we're going into a meeting tomorrow. Here's what I think's going to happen. Don't want you to be surprised. So that was, that's what you expect in the relationship between colleges and universities. So that was great. We certainly had the ability to replace those games with comparably high profile games. Mm-hmm. The challenge we had was we couldn't know with certainty that those conferences wouldn't subsequently make a decision to go conference only. And in fact, for example, there was a lot of public discussion about Alabama and Notre Dame. There were discussions about that. Mm-hmm. If we had done it, we'd be in a bad place today because the SEC subsequently decided to go conference only. That was the risk you had to sort of guard against. And so the opportunities were clearly there, but because we couldn't eliminate that risk, the ACC option was always the more attractive.
Got it. Makes sense. What was Coach Kelly and the team's reaction when they learned that they were going to have the opportunity to play for an ACC championship this year?
Yeah, I think it was energizing. It was something different. And especially, it's so hard for, I think, all students, but I work most closely with student athletes, to stay positive in this environment, right? I mean, it's just, the days are hard. Nothing is like you're used to doing it. Everything has changed for you. There's less interaction with your teammates, less with your coaches. So when we can find things that are positive and sort of energizing, it's great. And this was one of those, right? It was something else. It was another element to look forward to. But more than anything, it was the certainty, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they were so excited to get a schedule. Mm-hmm. That said, here are our opponents and here are the dates. That was liberating, but they're excited about the potential to see what playing, what having a season that leads to a conference championship and trying to qualify for that will be like.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, the coronavirus trend lines obviously throughout the nation appear to be headed in the wrong direction. And the question that's come to us from many viewers is, how closely have you been focused on what's happening with the professional experiments with the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball in particular that are in season? And how is that informing decisions for college football?
Yeah. We, like all of you, are consumed with the data and what's happening. First of all, just nationally. First thing I do every morning is look at the 14-day trend summary in the New York Times, and either feel good or bad, depending upon where the arrow is pointing. But we do look very closely at the major league sports experience. So what we know now is that you can operate in a bubble. The NBA and the NHL are both successfully doing that. That option is not available to us. Major League Baseball, operating in a more traditional environment with players going home at night, traveling and being in hotels, of course, has had a bigger challenge. Mm-hmm. And so we're paying a lot of attention to that, trying to understand where are those risks created in that model. Mm-hmm. But for us, it's so important to understand, and this is a point I just made twice this morning to reporters with whom I spoke. For us, it's not an athletics issue. It's a university issue. As you said, our students are returning this week. Class starts Monday. The most significant data point we're going to get is the success Notre Dame has opening the campus and the university. And we'll see. I love the fact the very smart decision to start school early benefits us because we're going to have a month of Notre Dame University experience before we are scheduled to play our first game. And that's going to tell us more than anything else.
Yeah, that's great. So I remember when we last met, I don't know, interviewed it had to be probably in April. You talked about a meeting that you and the Power Five conference commissioners, a phone call I think you had with Vice President Pence. And you talked about how college sports is different than professional sports, and that we wouldn't want to ask our student athletes to come back and compete on the field of competition if we weren't welcoming back the rest of the student body. Well, in fact, not at Notre Dame, but at many of our opposing schools, and maybe even most of the schools, they've moved to virtual classes. And yet, right now, they're still scheduled to compete by bringing back their student athletes or college football players and other sports. What do you think are the ramifications or the possible long-term consequences and for those schools treating their student athletes different than the rest of the student body?
Yeah, I want to be careful when answering this to note there are a lot of different models. So there's some schools that have gone virtual, but still open their dormitories or residence halls, right? So on that model, the students are back on campus, engaged in other activities. So, that would be one. But for the places who have told students to stay home and be virtual, I think it's one more thing that undermines the concept of the student athlete. The athlete is students. And frankly, sort of contributes to the growing national narrative to that extent. I'm sure our audience has read a lot about the demands by groups of players to the Pac-12 and now the Big Ten, and it'll occur at the ACC too. And it's important in the context of that sort of national discussion and that focus on some of those benefit issues, to not do anything which leads to or supports the argument that these aren't students first. And that's the critical dividing line in the future of athletics. Staying committed, having schools in this country stay committed to athletes as students.
Right. That's to pick up on that point. That was something that we saw from those two conferences, those public demands from their student athletes, I think particularly their football players. Also at the University of Texas, it wasn't just about coronavirus concerns and their protections, but it was also along issues of kind of race and how they're treated, as well as revenue sharing dynamics, et cetera. What do you think the ramifications are for the sport in general, and then for Notre Dame specifically?
Of the pandemic?
No, of the student athletes kind of calling for, through their conferences, calling for there to be some radical changes made to intercollegiate sport.
I think it's important to recognize that we need to be a little careful about characterizing any one contingent of student athletes being representative of all student athletes. There's no process for that to happen, right? There isn't some way nationally to elect those representatives and say that's who they are. And it's really important to keep in mind that we talk to our student athletes every day. And we talk about these issues and we want to understand their positions. And this always needs to be on a school by school basis because our models are different. As the specifics of it, some of the things struck me as pretty sensible. Some of them struck me as reflecting a lack of understanding of how college athletics works. It was interesting to pair a request for revenue distribution to uh, these student athletes with and a commitment to not eliminate any sports. Well, that just doesn't work.
Right.
There aren't the resources available. So we probably have to do a little better job of placing some of these things in context. But there was one request, for example, that said, since the conferences like the ACC have created their own networks, we'd love our parents to be able to get that access to the network through the university. Seems like a pretty reasonable request. Can we figure out how to do that?
Yeah. So yesterday, the ACC released the schedules, the 10+1, and we announced that we're going to play a home game against Western Michigan. Can you tell us how you worked to kind of bring about this schedule, and at the same time, how do you feel about it in the end?
Well, like most of the Notre Dame family, I have great misgivings about the decision we had to make to not play Navy this year. That's a critically important partner to us. The history of that relationship is so important to both parties. But that's the nature of this year. I value the USC relationship very highly as well, and I'm sad that we won't be able to play them this year. When we made the decision we made to be a full member of the ACC this year, you don't get to pick and choose the rules you follow. You're either in or you're not. And the presidents, with Notre Dame voting, passed a rule that said that +1 game had to be played in your home state. That was based on a health concern, right? It was a way of saying, we don't want an additional travel trip. It'll be in your home state. It might be Georgia Tech might be busing to Georgia, but it'll be in your home state. But that was about health and safety. That was a rule that made a game in Annapolis unavailable for us. We talked about whether we could find alternatives, and given the complexities of this, broadcast rights and other things, really wasn't practical. I want to stress what a great partner Navy was in these discussions. They were creative, tried to find solutions. Chet was great at exploring options, but there's just not one that works. And so it's a consequence of the pandemic. It's a sad one, but we move on, and for the 11th game, take the only home game that was available to us.
So do you see resuming the Navy year in, year out series and the USC series beginning again next year?
Well, we sure hope so. I don't know what the tail of the pandemic will look like.
Right.
It would not shock me, for example, if it continues into the spring, that those conferences decide to go schedule only for conference only for another year. I hope it's not a long-term trend, because we do want to play those games. Navy announced the agreement we reached in principle very easily that we're going to extend the series to reaffirm for people the importance of it and our commitment to it long term.
Fantastic. So Ohio State just recently announced that attendance in their football stadium will not exceed 20% this fall. There will be no tailgating on campus at Ohio State. Penn State announced, I believe, yesterday that they will have no fans at any of their fall sporting events in the general seating areas this fall, unless the governor changes the rule of not allowing groups beyond 250. When do you believe Notre Dame will make that determination about apportioning tickets and how they'll manage the game day events? And what are the guiding principles that you'll bring to that decision?
Yeah. First of all, I think you can expect to see it next week. We've been working hard on it. We worked hard on it in advance of the schedule being determined, but the schedule being determined had some impact. For example, we're going to play, if we play the season, we'll be playing Syracuse here after the students have left. So what do you do with that game? But our guiding principles have been very consistent. The first, obviously, is the general proposition health and safety. And so we've consulted very closely with the state and county officials about our thoughts, their views, and that's been a driving factor. And I must say the cooperation we've received from the county health officials here, Dr. Fox, university-wide, not just athletics, has really been exemplary. The next guidepost for us, so that issue of health and safety frames the how many people discussion.
Right.
And you know, I think what you're seeing, Ohio State's an example, but across the NFL, they're talking about a 20% limit. I think you can anticipate that'll emerge as something of a national marker. But then within that, what are your priorities? And we've stated from day one, our priorities are our students. Their students playing the game, their fellow classmates ought to be able to attend the game and watch them play. And so those will be our two guideposts. We've developed a lot. It's interesting as you sit down to build the policy and principles out for this, there are a whole lot more decisions than I anticipated. So many moving pieces to it. But we're pretty much through that process. We're vetting it internally, and I would expect to see something next week.
Fantastic. So tell us about the testing of student athletes on campus. How was that managed, and are you pleased with the results that you've seen today?
Yeah, I'm very pleased. You know, the key guidepost to this was athletic directors and coaches didn't try and be the ones deciding any of this. We relied exclusively on our health professionals. Dr. Matt Leisler, the team doctor for football, has been the one who has taken the lead on all of this. He's on the ACC medical committee. He's in touch with physicians all around the country. So he's helped us set the standard. Our athletic trainers have been very involved, the university medical personnel. So that's where this all originated. And it's very much a campus approach. Mm-hmm. Because we brought a segment of students, football players and volleyball players back earlier, we got to be the test case for the procedures. You know, the first week you learn the things you don't have right. So a few things you always identify that you could do better. We tweak those, and I would say the process has been exceptional and really well set up for the rest of the campus to come in and benefit from that. For our audience members who are in the area or get by campus, the testing center that the university has set up at the southwest entrance to the stadium is remarkable. It's such a great visual symbol of the university's commitment to get this right. An investment of resources and people that makes the entire testing process work so well. And so I couldn't be more pleased as I talk to others around the country. I think there's a clear sense that the way we've set this up is best in class. And so that's been great. That we've achieved such great results. Only 2 positive tests among all the student athletes across those 2 sports that we've tested reflects the student athletes. It's not us. Their desire to play, their willingness to hold each other accountable is what produces that success. And I couldn't be more proud of our student athletes in that regard. You look at the numbers at other universities and the experiences they're having, that's about not having that pure accountability. And congratulations to our football and volleyball players. And I'm sure we'll see the same thing as our other sports start up.
Yeah, no, that's really a result. In some ways, it's been anomalous because so many of the other football programs have announced, widespread positive results. When you look at our opponents for the season, do you think there's chances that given the upswing with the virus, that we may have opponents that couldn't field the team, that we might miss some of the games that are actually scheduled?
Oh, I view that as almost inevitable. And it can be for a host of reasons. So an opponent may be okay, but the community in which they play is not in great shape. And we may make a decision in the interest of protecting our students not to go there. There'll be a host of reasons. You may have a limited number of positive tests, but conceivably they're at a position that makes it untenable for you to safely play. I mean, let's say one week we had 8 positive tests. Well, if all 8 positive tests were offensive linemen, I'm not sure I want to subject the rest of the offense to playing under those circumstances. So there'll be interruptions, there'll be cancellations if we play this fall, and we all understand that's still to be determined in a sense. You can expect all those things to happen.
Yeah, remember at the beginning I said that I really do think you have a genius for predicting trends and everything else. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What would you give the odds that there will be a football season this year, given the pandemic?
Well, you are putting me on the spot.
I am.
Again, number one factor is going to be university success generally across the country returning to school. Having said that, I'm gonna avoid the number.
Okay.
But I'm more pessimistic this week than I was the week before or the week before that. I'm glad that we've prepared. I'm glad that we have a schedule. I'm glad that everything's in place to give us a chance to play. But there are a number of trends around the country that make it problematic. And remember, this is not a unilateral decision.
Right.
So, if a couple of key conferences decide they're not ready to go this fall, it probably dictates the result.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that, because it's something for me who even works at the university. It's confusing when it comes to football. Who makes these decisions with regard to testing protocols or championships for the fall sports seasons and the like? How much of these are made by the conferences themselves, and what role does the NCAA play in all of this?
It's essentially all conference driven, which makes it different from any other college sport where the NCAA plays a larger role. The NCAA doesn't host the football championship. College football playoff does. College football playoff is owned and managed by the conferences. So it's just a very different dynamic. So it's very conference based. The ACC, as with all conferences, has developed very detailed protocols for return to competition, for what the testing standards are, who can be on the field. Essentially, no one's getting on the field that hasn't been tested that week. They set a rule that when a player comes off the field, he must have his helmet on or a mask on. If you take your helmet off, you must put a mask on sitting on the sideline. Those examples are just to say very detailed rules that cover everything.
Right.
That happens at the conference level. There's engagement and conversation back and forth among the conferences, but there'll be differences from conference to conference on some of those protocols and procedures. There's a sort of sloppiness to that, if you will. But it also makes it sort of fun. I mean, that is reflective of the American educational system. The universities are independent, right? They make their own decisions, and this is a version of that. The cooperation among the ACC schools, the communication among the presidents and ADs is great, and so it's really, in a conference-driven model, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Now, again, this is one of these very difficult questions to ask because it's about predicting the future in a sense. But if the fall football season and fall sports were to be canceled due to reasons of the pandemic, do you think there will be an effort made to move the football season, the other sports, to a spring season? Is that feasible?
I do. And part of that is the experience we had this spring where we saw all our spring student athletes lose their opportunity to compete. It was devastating for them. It was so much of their identity is wrapped up in their sport. They prepare all year for it. And so we'd really like to avoid a repeat of that if we can. With the spring sports, you didn't have an opportunity to shift them to the next season because it was summer. And so they simply lost that opportunity. So we certainly want to explore the chances to move the fall sports. In our case, that's cross country, volleyball, both soccer and football, to some form of a spring season.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest of those, by the way, would be cross country because track and field runs. So that one may be a challenge. The others have some chance.
Yeah. So Coach Mike Bray, just I think a couple of days ago, said that college basketball could end up being the savior of college sports this year. And he said now March Madness could possibly become May Madness. What are your thoughts about that?
First of all, one of the reasons I love working with Coach Bray is that optimism. He exudes that in everything he does and with his team. And the way he sort of embraced this with his team to talk about the opportunity the pandemic has presented to them is a great example of educational leadership. Yeah, it's interesting. There are pluses and minuses to that. The plus is there are a lot more basketball games and a lot more teams that play, schools that play basketball. So constructing a schedule, if you wanted to regionalize it, for example, so there was less air travel, you could do that. If you wanted to go conference only, play 2 games against each team, that's a big schedule. I mean, so it has a flexibility that football doesn't present. That gives it a good opportunity. It's easier to prepare for. As Mike is fond of saying, hey, it's basketball. You need a couple of weeks and you can go play somebody. And so those are the positives. The flip side is indoor sports are going to be harder, just from the transmission of the virus. Right. And so that's the sort of plus and minus of that. You got a little more leeway with outdoor sports, but listen, if as a country we haven't made more progress by the start of the winter sports season, our problems are bigger than whether we're playing athletics. We got a lot of major issues in front of us.
Yeah. And there's some hope, right? The vaccine on the horizon and some of the therapies that are out there being advanced. I think there certainly is hope that by the end of the year, that hopefully things will be better for all of us. But with all of the uncertainty and the tremendous amount of distraction that is out there with all kinds of events that are going on in the nation right now, how do our coaches, our fall sports coaches in particular, how do they keep their teams focused? And how do they keep them really preparing for successful seasons? What have you seen?
Yeah. First of all, let me say there's the dynamic of watching coaches who can't coach is interesting. Their life is so organized around that activity. They can't go out recruiting. They haven't been able to be with their student athletes. It's been really hard on them. They've been super creative. A lot of the same things we all do, a lot of Zoom meetings. What I've seen a lot of is really systematic opportunities or plans to make sure every student is in contact every day. So whether they take their assistant coaches and divide them up over the squad, or they divide the squad into units and they talk to each other. I mean, it's not just getting the team on a Zoom call. It's been a much more detailed plan of a series of contacts and sharing information. We're very concerned about the mental health of our students generally, right? This is a tough circumstance for them. Think of all last year's seniors who lost job opportunities, lost the opportunity to compete in a sport or be in a play or whatever it was. Students coming in this year who are not able to do some of the things that make Notre Dame in the interest of health and safety. That creates a lot of mental stress. And so our coaches, everybody at Notre Dame, has been great at staying focused on that. We spend a lot of time talking with our staff here about, here are the things to look for that might be signals of mental distress. Here are the referral systems if you have somebody in those circumstances. So staying in touch has been number one in that regard, but being informed about how best to stay in touch and what to look for has been the second part of it.
Mhm. I remember having a discussion years ago with the late Gene Corrigan, former athletic director at Notre Dame and ACC conference commissioner, kind of beloved figure and a very colorful figure too in the world of intercollegiate athletics. And I asked him, what is the most important role of an athletic director? And he said unequivocally, it's saving the coaches from themselves.
Yes.
The pressures that are placed on them, they can tend to be a self-destructive lot. And the pressures to win and to do it the right way at the highest levels every year. And I imagine that for those who are in athletic administration, during times like this, and I know even for our team, I'm concerned about the mental health of our team, the morale, not letting, a despair creep in. I imagine that this has raised the ante for all those that are in athletic administration.
Yeah, very much so. And one of my challenges has been to sort of help reorient them. They are so geared to think in terms of the factors that impact competitive outcomes,
Mhm.
right? And they are so competitive and careful not to let other people get a competitive advantage on them.
Yeah.
You can't worry about competitive advantages in this environment, right? You just have to let it go. Some school may choose to do something which, yes, will give them a competitive advantage. We're not going there because it's not consistent with health and safety. We have, as you have been with your staff, just over and over again saying, none of the other things matter. It's just health this year.
Right.
It's the health and safety of our students. And they've been great about sort of adjusting to that focus. The ACC just adopted a fall sports schedule that only has 6 conference games for soccer and volleyball. That's a tough circumstance for students and coaches who are so looking forward to competing.
Right.
You've got to put that in a health context, right? You got to deal with that disappointment by saying, we understand your disappointment,
Yeah.
but we think this is the best way to keep everybody safe.
Right. Right. So another tough question here. We're getting near the end, but will Notre Dame's football experiment this year by joining the ACC and participating in a conference championship, do you see this having long-term implications for Notre Dame's football independence?
Well, at my age, you don't answer any long-term questions, but let me say that first of all, the ACC is such a great partner, and this is an example of that. So I value everything about our relationship with that conference, and it's a perfect place for us. From a personal perspective of this athletic director, independence is still vitally important to me. I think what it does for this university in a much broader sense than athletics is important enough to try and maintain. You've heard me say it before, but no football program in the country has ever played in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York in 1 year. We've done it 9 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's what independence is. We were supposed to be in Lambeau against Green Bay this year. That game would have drawn such interest and attention. That's what independence allows us to do. So very important to me. And in that sense,
I just want to clarify, we were going to play Wisconsin, not Green Bay in Lambeau, but the team has gotten really good. It could,
sorry.
Yeah, no, you got it.
And so that all of that remains very important to me personally, and as the leader of this department will continue to be an important goal. Now, having said that, none of us knows the consequences of the pandemic.
Right.
And as I said earlier, if conferences came out of this and said, you know what, we really like this conference only scheduling model, that would have a big role in our ability to remain independent. And so we don't know, we can't predict what lies ahead, but we go into it with a strong interest and intention to stay independent.
Got it. Jack, any parting thoughts, in particular when you think about the audience that's been looking on so many structure their lives in the fall around Notre Dame football in particular, and there's so many moving variables, and sometimes there's a concern that we're not being transparent enough. And as you said, the dynamics are changing not only by the day but by the hour. Any parting thoughts that you think would be helpful to the viewers that are looking on?
Well, two. The first would be you should be incredibly proud of the leadership of this university, and I'm not including myself in that. I'm talking about Father John and Mara Lynn and Shannon and Mickey and you, Lou. The steps this university has taken to give our students a chance to be back here and to have a successful experience this year at Notre Dame is just amazing. And of all the things the students I talk to tell me, that's the thing they say the most. They say, I'm excited to be back. I hope I can play, but I can't tell you how appreciative I am of everything this university's done to give me a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it in the signage, you see it in the testing, you see it in every step we're taking. Nothing has been not done because it was inconvenient or expensive. We just said, we're going to do this the right way. And it is the national standard for doing it. If we can't do it, it can't be done, right? And so you should be incredibly proud of the university leadership. The second is this is going to have a long tail. Even when the vaccine comes and the country is safer, the tail of this pandemic and its implications for us are going to be great. We're going to need you more than ever to help us through this. The challenges we'll face in the future are going to be pretty daunting. I don't know how people will feel about returning to the stadium next year if we don't have any limitations on attendance. I don't know whether students are going to be as willing to leave home when they're making decisions about where to go to school after this pandemic. And certainly I don't know what finances will allow us to do in the future, given the extraordinary financial consequence of this year. So thanks for all you've done for us, and thanks for what I know you'll do in the future, because we have a tough journey ahead of us, but this is a university and it's a university community that'll figure out a way to navigate that successfully.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Jack. And we're really blessed by your leadership, and especially in an incredibly difficult time like this, to have somebody who is seasoned in his 12th year, who's somebody who brings the strategic thinking, the intellect to these complex decisions, and the moral compass that is in the fiber of Notre Dame that you bring to your leadership and all that. We are incredibly blessed and hopeful amidst all the difficulties, in large part because of your leadership and the rest of the team, hopeful about where we're going to go in the future. So again, my heartfelt thanks to you. Thanks for this time today. How do you follow a Jack Swarbrick? Well, next week, we're going to bring in Father John Jenkins. That's the only way you could possibly do. So we will be interviewing Father John. We will have a couple day sample size of classes and everybody back. And it'll be next Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So we invite you to tune in. The following week, we'll be joined by the Vice President of Student Affairs, Erin Hoffman Harding. She'll have about a 10-day sample of classes and be able to talk about the student experience and how we're doing and what we're learning at that point. And again, my heartfelt thanks to Jack, and our prayers in particular for all our students, but especially for our student athletes, and that their dreams may be realized and we'll be able to keep them safe along the way.
Lou, thank you. I just want to say thank you to you, Lou, for having me on. And I think the strategy of leading off with members of the class of 76 is really wise, a wise choice. So Father John and I thank you.
only second only to the class of '84. But let's, as we always do in these sessions, wherever you are, at home, in the workplace, if you would just join us, we'll close with a prayer to Our Lady, who continues to animate this place and to whom we contribute all of our success. And so we say together, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you all. Take care. God bless. Go Irish.
Irish.